The sharp words still rang in my ears as I stood alone in our rented apartment in Lisbon. "You're only good for complaining and ruining our happy moments, Mom," Jackson had shouted, his face contorted with anger I'd never seen before. "We work all year to take this vacation, and you can't even pretend to enjoy it for our sake," Cheyenne added, tears streaming down her face. I hadn't slept all night after that argument. I'd spent hours staring at the ceiling, replaying their words, wondering when I'd become this person they described, a burden, a joy killer. When had my children started looking at me with such contempt? The morning sunlight streamed through the curtains I hadn't closed, illuminating the empty wine glass on the nightstand, evidence of my attempt to numb the pain of their words. I checked my phone. 9:37 a.m. They must be having breakfast by now. I'd try to talk to them, to explain that I wasn't trying to ruin anything. I was just tired, overwhelmed, still adjusting to life without their father. I threw on a robe and walked to their room, rehearsing an apology. But when I pushed the door open, their beds were empty. Not just empty, stripped bare. My heart rate accelerated as I rushed to check their closet. Empty hangers, no suitcases. "Cheyenne? Jackson?" I called out, my voice echoing in the hollow apartment. That's when I saw the note on the kitchen counter, written in Jackson's neat handwriting. "Nobody can stand you anymore. We've gone home. Don't bother looking for your passport or return ticket. They're not there. Figure it out yourself for once." The world tilted beneath my feet. I frantically checked my purse, then tore apart my luggage, the drawers, every corner of my room. They were right. My passport was gone. I grabbed my phone with trembling hands and opened the airline app. My return flight had been canceled. My own children had abandoned me in a foreign country. I sank to the floor, clutching the note. What kind of mother was I that my own children would do this to me? The question clanged in my head like a broken bell. The past 3 years since Robert left had been hard on all of us, but I never imagined it would come to this. My phone buzzed with a text. "Cheyenne, the rent is paid until the end of the week. We've left enough cash for you to get by until then." At least they hadn't left me completely destitute. Small comfort. I sat there for hours, cycling through shock, anger, hurt, and back to shock again. By late afternoon, I had tried calling them 12 times. No answers. I left voicemails ranging from tearful pleas to furious demands to worried questions about their safety. Nothing. When the landlord called to check if we needed anything, I couldn't bring myself to explain what had happened. The shame was too great. I just said everything was fine. That night, I lay awake again, this time with a different question. What now? I was 52 years old, alone in Lisbon with limited funds, no return ticket, and no passport. I needed to contact the American embassy, but the thought of explaining that my children had stolen my passport made my chest tight with humiliation. As dawn broke, I made a decision. I would get my passport replaced, obviously. I would find a way home, but maybe not immediately. Maybe this was an opportunity. Robert's departure had shattered me. For 25 years, I'd been his wife, the mother to his children. When he left for his young assistant, I'd collapsed in on myself, becoming a hollow version of who I used to be. I could see now how my bitterness had poisoned everything. Even this vacation my children had planned to cheer me up. I opened the French doors to the tiny balcony and looked out at the pink-tinged Lisbon sky. I remembered something I'd read once. Sometimes when things are falling apart, they may actually be falling into place. Was that possible? Could this cruel abandonment somehow be a beginning rather than an end? I showered, dressed, and made a strong cup of coffee. I would go to the embassy today. I would sort out the passport situation, but I wouldn't book a flight home. Not yet. There was a knock at the door, probably the cleaning service. I opened it to find an older woman with kind eyes, carrying a basket of fresh bread. "Good morning," she said in heavily accented English. "I am Elisa from downstairs. I see you alone today? Your children? They leave early?" The simple question almost undid me. I swallowed hard. "Yes," I managed. "They had to return home suddenly." She nodded, seeming to sense there was more to the story. "You stay? For now," I said, surprised by the firmness in my voice. "Good. Lisbon is good for healing hearts. she said, pressing the breadbasket into my hands. Come for dinner tonight. Apartment 2B. No argument. Before I could respond, she was already heading back down the stairs, leaving me standing in the doorway with the warm bread and an unexpected invitation. I closed the door and leaned against it, the aroma of fresh bread filling the apartment. My children thought they were punishing me, teaching me some kind of lesson. They couldn't have known they might be giving me exactly what I needed, a chance to remember who I was before I became the bitter, complaining woman they couldn't stand. I pulled out my phone and saw a notification from my banking app. A large cash withdrawal had been made yesterday, enough for 2 last-minute international flights. I should have been angry, but instead, I felt a strange sense of calm overtake me. I texted Cheyenne one last time. I'm safe. I'll be in touch when I'm ready. I love you both, even now. Then I blocked their numbers. As I bit into the still warm bread, I felt something unfamiliar stirring inside me. It wasn't quite hope, not yet, but it was possibility. And for now, that was enough. What I didn't know as I sat there in that sunny Lisbon apartment was that in just a few hours, I would meet someone at the American Embassy who would change the course of my life in ways I could never have imagined. The American Embassy was crowded. I clutched my number and waited, rehearsing my explanation. The truth was humiliating, but I couldn't think of a believable alternative. My children stole my passport. My children abandoned me. Each time I thought it, the words felt unreal. Number 47? I approached the counter where a middle-aged woman with tired eyes looked up from her computer. How can I help you today? She asked mechanically. I need to report a stolen passport, I said, my voice thin. Stolen? Did you file a police report? No, it's complicated. I took a deep breath. My children took it. They left for home without me yesterday and took my passport with them. Her practiced neutrality slipped, revealing a flash of surprise before her professional mask returned. I see. That's unusual. Are they minors? No. They're 23 and 25. She nodded and began typing. We'll need to complete some paperwork. It will take at least 2 weeks to process an emergency passport. 2 weeks? The timeline startled me, though I wasn't sure why. Hadn't I just decided to stay longer? There are procedures, ma'am. Meanwhile, I suggest you contact your family and ask them to return your property. The way she said family made me wince. Excuse me? A voice from behind me. I couldn't help overhearing. I turned to find a woman about my age, her silver-streaked brown hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. She wore linen pants and a flowing tunic that somehow looked elegant despite the day's heat. Margaret Wilson, she said, extending her hand. I work with the embassy's Citizen Services Department. Why don't you come to my office once you've finished the initial paperwork? An hour later, I sat across from Margaret in her small but immaculate office. So, Claire, she said, looking over my forms, you're stranded in Lisbon. I wouldn't say stranded exactly. No? Her eyebrow arched. I have enough money for a while, and maybe this is an opportunity. Margaret smiled. I like your attitude. Most people in your situation would be panicking. Oh, I did that part already, I admitted. But then I realized, what's the rush to go back? To an empty house? To children who clearly want nothing to do with me? What did you do before, career-wise? I was a translator, French and Spanish, but I gave it up when Jackson was born. After that, I just raised the children, supported Robert's career. My voice trailed off. Robert? My ex-husband. He left 3 years ago. For someone younger, of course. I was surprised by the lack of bitterness in my voice. Maybe I was finally healing, or maybe I was still numb from my children's betrayal. Margaret nodded thoughtfully. Languages, huh? And you're stuck in Portugal for at least 2 weeks. She leaned forward. I have a friend who runs a small winery just over the border in Spain, Quinta del Sol. They cater to tourists, mostly Americans and British. They need someone who speaks English and can learn about their wines quickly. Temporary position. You're offering me a job? Suggesting an opportunity, room and board included. It would get you out of this expensive city, give you something to do while waiting for your passport. You said yourself there's no rush to go home. My mind raced. But I don't know anything about wine. Margaret laughed. Neither did Pilar when she started. Now she owns the place. She's a good teacher. She pulled out a card and wrote something on the back. Call her. Tell her Maggie sent you. Think about it overnight if you need to. I didn't need to. Something inside me had awakened. Curiosity, perhaps. Or desperation disguised as courage. I'll call her now. Margaret smiled. I thought you might say that. Asiad. 2 days later, I was on a train watching Lisbon disappear behind me. After dinner with Elisa, who had hugged me and insisted I write to her, I had packed my few belongings and left the apartment keys with the landlord. When I called Pilar, she'd been warm and enthusiastic. Any friend of Maggie's? Yes, come immediately. The harvest season is beginning, and we are short-handed. Now, as the train crossed into Spain, I felt a strange lightness. For 25 years, I had been defined by my relationships to others. Robert's wife, Cheyenne, and Jackson's mother. Even after Robert left, I had clung to my identity as mother, even as my children grew increasingly impatient with my neediness and bitterness. For the first time in decades, no one on this train knew who I was. No one had expectations. I could be anyone. The train wound through rolling hills covered with vineyards, the afternoon sun turning everything golden. I pressed my forehead against the window and allowed myself to feel the smallest flicker of excitement. Pilar met me at the small rural station in her dusty pickup truck, her wild curly hair escaping from under a wide-brimmed hat. Claire, welcome to wine country. She embraced me like an old friend, though we'd only spoken once by phone. Come, come. We have dinner waiting, and you must be exhausted. The drive to Quinta del Sol took us through narrow country roads flanked by vineyards. As we rounded a bend, Pilar pointed. There, that's us. The winery sat on a gentle slope, terracotta buildings with a red-tiled roof glowing in the setting sun. Rows of grapevines stretched in every direction, and a stone path led to what looked like a tasting room with outdoor tables. It's beautiful, I said, meaning it. Wait until you taste the wine, Pilar grinned. Then you'll really fall in love. I'm not sure I'm cut out for this, I admitted as we pulled up to the main house. I don't know anything about winemaking. Can you learn? Are you willing to work hard? That's all I need. Pilar cut the engine. Besides, you speak English beautifully, and that's what I really need for the tasting room. The rest you'll pick up. She showed me to a small but comfortable room in the main house. Rest tonight. Tomorrow your new life begins. I sat on the bed after she left, looking at my phone. No messages from my children, though I'd unblocked them before leaving Lisbon. I wondered if they'd tried to reach me during the time they were blocked, if they'd worried when they couldn't get through. I wondered what they thought I was doing now. I thought about texting them, letting them know I was safe at least. But something held me back. Let them wonder for a while. Let them feel a fraction of the abandonment I'd felt. Instead, I opened my banking app. The joint account I shared with Jackson showed another withdrawal. Smaller this time. Groceries, probably. Life continuing normally for them while mine had been completely upended. A knock at my door interrupted my thoughts. Pilar stood there with a glass of deep red wine. For you, she said. A proper welcome. I took a sip and closed my eyes, savoring the rich complexity. It's wonderful. It's life, Pilar said, sitting beside me. Wine is life in a glass. Sunshine, rain, the minerals in the soil, the hands that tended the vines, the time in the barrel. Everything that happens becomes part of the story. I looked at her, this vibrant woman who spoke of wine with such passion. How did you end up here? I asked. Margaret mentioned you didn't know anything about wine when you started. Pilar's eyes darkened. That's a story for another night with a different bottle. She patted my hand. Rest now. Tomorrow is your first day. After she left, I stood at the window overlooking the vineyard, silver in the moonlight. I thought of Robert, of Cheyenne and Jackson, of the life I'd left behind. Not just in Boston, but in Lisbon too. I had traveled further in these last 3 days than in the previous 3 years. I sipped the wine, thinking about Pilar's words. Everything that happens becomes part of the story. Even being abandoned in Lisbon by my own children. Even this impulsive decision to work at a winery. As I drifted to sleep, I wondered what story I was becoming part of, and whether I would recognize myself by the end of it. What I couldn't have known then was that the next morning would bring not just my first day of work, but an unexpected visitor who would force me to confront the very past I was trying to escape. My first week at Quinta del Sol passed in a blur of activity. Days started early, with Pilar teaching me about the different grape varieties and winemaking processes. Afternoons, I worked in the tasting room, where my language skills proved surprisingly valuable with the international tourists who visited. "You're a natural," Pilar said one evening as we sat on the terrace, watching the sunset paint the vineyards gold. "The American couple today bought 6 cases after your description of the Tempranillo." I smiled, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the wine. "I just told them what you taught me." "No, you made them feel the story of the wine. That's a gift." She refilled our glasses. "How are you feeling? About everything else, I mean." I considered the question. Better than I should, maybe. I still haven't heard from my children. I'd checked my phone that morning. Nothing. I should be more worried, more hurt. "Perhaps you needed this break from them as much as they needed one from you," Pilar suggested gently. I nodded, staring into my wine glass. I became someone I didn't recognize after Robert left. Bitter, clingy, always complaining. I looked up at her. My children were right about that much. "We all have our dark seasons," Pilar said. "What matters is recognizing when we're in one." I was about to ask about her own dark season, the story she had promised to tell me someday, when Miguel, Pilar's foreman, approached. "Señora, there is someone asking for Claire at the gate." My heart jumped. "Who?" Miguel shrugged. "A man. American, I think. He would not give his name." Pilar looked at me questioningly. I shook my head, confused. "I don't know who would know I'm here." "Shall I send him away?" Miguel asked. I stood, curiosity overcoming apprehension. "No, I'll come." Pilar touched my arm. "Do you want me to come with you?" "No, it's fine. I'll handle it." I headed down the path toward the main gate, my mind racing. Had Jackson come to apologize? But how would he have found me? The figure standing by the gate was backlit by the setting sun. A tall silhouette I recognized instantly. Not Jackson. Robert. My ex-husband stood there in pressed khakis and a button-down shirt, looking exactly like the successful architect he was. 3 years since our divorce, and the sight of him still made my stomach clench. "Claire," he said, relief evident in his voice. "Thank God. Are you all right?" I stopped a few feet away, crossing my arms. "What are you doing here, Robert?" "The kids called me in a panic. They said you disappeared in Lisbon. They thought you might have—" He hesitated. "They were worried you might have harmed yourself." The accusation hit me like a slap. Because that would be less embarrassing than the truth? That they abandoned their mother in a foreign country? Robert had the decency to look uncomfortable. "They told me what happened. It wasn't right, what they did." "No, it wasn't." I was surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. "How did you find me?" "The embassy. I have a friend in the State Department who pulled some strings. They said a woman named Margaret had helped you find work at a winery in Spain." He gestured around. "It took some doing to find this specific place." "What do you want, Robert?" "To bring you home. The kids are sorry. They were upset. They acted rashly. So they sent you to clean up their mess? Like always?" The bitterness in my voice surprised me. I thought I'd left that behind. "Claire, be reasonable. You can't stay here. This isn't your life." "Isn't it?" I challenged. "Because right now, it feels more like my life than anything has in the past 3 years." Robert sighed, running a hand through his hair, still thick but grayer than I remembered. "At least come have dinner with me. We can talk about this like adults." "We are talking like adults. I'm saying no." "Claire, is everything all right?" Pilar appeared beside me, her expression wary. "Pilar, this is Robert, my ex-husband." Recognition flashed in her eyes. "Ah, the one who left for someone younger." Robert flushed. "It wasn't like that." "It was exactly like that," I said. "Pilar, Robert was just leaving." "Actually," Pilar interrupted, her tone suddenly gracious, "why don't you join us for dinner, Robert? We were about to eat, and there's plenty." She looked at me. "Unless you object, Claire?" I wanted to object. Strongly. But curiosity won out. "Fine. Dinner. Pilar led us to the terrace where a table had been set for two. She quickly added a third-place setting and disappeared into the kitchen, leaving us in an awkward silence. "This place is beautiful," Robert offered. "Yes. The kids miss you, Claire." I raised an eyebrow. "That's why they stole my passport and abandoned me?" "They're confused, upset. They say you've been difficult since the divorce." "Difficult," I repeated. "Is that what you call grieving the end of a 25-year marriage?" Robert had the grace to look ashamed. "We all dealt with it differently. You dealt with it by moving in with your 28-year-old assistant before the papers were even signed. Amber and I don't want to hear about Amber." I cut him off. "What do the kids actually want, Robert? For me to come home and pretend everything's fine? Go back to being sad, bitter mom they can complain about? They want to make things right. By sending you instead of coming themselves? That's not making things right. That's damage control." I took a sip of wine to steady myself. "And what about you? What do you want?" Robert looked genuinely surprised by the question. "I want you to be okay. I never wanted to hurt you, Claire. But you did. And now you get to be the hero, swooping in to rescue the abandoned ex-wife." Pilar returned with a platter of food, saving Robert from having to respond. She served us roasted lamb with vegetables from her garden and another bottle of Quinta del Sol's best red. The conversation during dinner was strained but civil. Pilar asked Robert about his architecture firm, and he asked about the winery's history. I remained mostly silent, watching the man I had spent most of my adult life with, trying to understand how I felt about seeing him again. After dinner, Pilar excused herself with a meaningful look in my direction. "I'll leave you two to talk." When she was gone, Robert leaned forward. "Claire, be serious. What's your plan here?" "I don't have a plan. For the first time in decades, I'm not planning everything around everyone else's needs." "So this is what? Some kind of rebellion?" "This is me finding out who I am when I'm not defined by being your wife or the kid's mother." Robert looked genuinely perplexed. "You can do that in Boston." "No, I can't. Because in Boston, everyone already knows who I am, or who they think I am. Here, I'm just Claire. The kids need you." I laughed, a short, sharp sound. "The kids are adults, Robert. And they made it very clear they don't need or want me around. They made a mistake." "Yes, they did. And now they're going to live with the consequences of that mistake for a while." Robert studied me, as if seeing me for the first time. "You've changed." "I'm changing," I corrected him. "It's a process." "How long are you planning to stay here?" "I don't know. My emergency passport should be ready next week. After that?" I shrugged. "We'll see." "And what should I tell the kids?" "Tell them I'm safe. Tell them I'm fine. Tell them I'll contact them when I'm ready." He nodded slowly. "And what about the house? The bills?" "They're adults, Robert. They can figure it out." I stood up. "It's getting late and I start work early tomorrow." "So that's it? You're not coming back with me?" "No, I'm not." Robert looked as if he wanted to argue further, but something in my expression must have stopped him. He stood, reaching for his wallet. "At least let me leave you some money." The old Claire would have taken it, grateful for his help. But I wasn't her anymore. "I don't need your money. I have a job. Pouring wine for tourists isn't a career, Claire." "Maybe not, but it's a start." I walked him to his rental car, the gravel crunching under our feet in the quiet night. At the car, he turned to me. "I am sorry, you know, for how everything happened." "I know," I said, surprised to find I meant it. "But sorry doesn't change anything." He nodded, then hesitated before leaning in to kiss my cheek. "Take care of yourself, Claire." "I am." For the first time in a long time. I watched his taillights disappear down the long drive, feeling lighter than I had in years. When I turned back toward the house, Pilar was sitting on the steps, waiting. "You okay?" she asked. Surprisingly, yes. I sat beside her. "Thank you for inviting him to dinner. I think I needed that closure. We all need to face our pasts eventually." She handed me a glass of what looked like brandy. "I promised you my story. I think tonight is the night for it." I accepted the glass, sensing we were at a turning point. "I'm listening." Pilar took a deep breath. 15 years ago, I wasn't Pilar who owns a winery. I was Pilar who was married to a very powerful, very cruel man. What she told me over the next hour would change my perspective entirely. Not just about Pilar, but about the true meaning of strength, survival, and reinvention. And it would prepare me for the far more difficult confrontation yet to come. Pilar's story haunted me for days afterward. She had been married to a prominent businessman in Madrid, a man admired publicly, but who privately controlled and abused her. When she finally gathered the courage to leave, he used his connections to freeze her accounts, block her employment opportunities, and turn friends against her. She fled to this rural area with nothing but a suitcase and began working at this very winery, first cleaning, then serving in the tasting room, then learning every aspect of winemaking. The owner, an old man named Mateo, became like a father to me, she'd explained. When he died 7 years ago, he left the winery to me. His family contested the will, of course, but he had made everything legal. "What happened to your husband?" I'd asked. "He remarried, someone younger, more controllable. Last I heard, she was in the hospital with accidental injuries." Pilar's eyes had hardened. I tried to reach out to her, but she wouldn't speak to me. That's how isolation works. You believe you're alone, that no one will help you. Do you ever regret leaving, even with everything you went through after? Pilar had looked at me with surprise. Never. Not for 1 second. I'd rather struggle on my feet than live on my knees. Now, as I worked in the tasting room, telling tourists about the mineral notes in the Albarino, I found myself thinking about choices and consequences. Pilar had made the hardest choice imaginable and suffered for it, but she'd rebuilt herself in the process. I had made no choice at all. Life had happened to me. Robert left, and I collapsed. My children abandoned me, and I ended up here. But now, I was choosing to stay, to learn, to grow. 3 weeks had passed since Robert's visit. My emergency passport had arrived, but I hadn't booked a flight home. Instead, I'd asked Pilar if I could stay through the harvest season, and she'd agreed enthusiastically. "You're good with the guests," she'd said. "And you're learning the winemaking quickly. Stay as long as you like." I'd established a routine. Early mornings in the vineyard, learning about soil conditions and ripeness from Miguel. Late mornings and afternoons in the tasting room. Evenings helping Pilar with bookkeeping. Discovering I had a talent for organization that the creative, spontaneous Pilar lacked. "We make a good team," she'd commented one night as we finished the monthly accounts. I felt useful for the first time in years, not as someone's wife or mother, but as myself, Claire, with skills and insights that were valued. I still hadn't called Cheyenne or Jackson, though I'd unblocked their numbers. My anger had faded to a dull ache, but I wasn't ready to hear their explanations or apologies. Not yet. Let them sit with what they'd done a while longer. One warm afternoon, I was alone in the tasting room when a group of American tourists arrived. I greeted them with my now practiced introduction to Quinta del Sol's history and wines. "Claire?" I froze at the familiar voice. Cheyenne stood at the back of the group, her face a mixture of shock and relief. Beside her was Jackson, looking uncomfortable in the summer heat. "If you'll excuse me," I said to the other tourists, my professional smile fixed in place. "Miguel will be with you shortly to begin your tasting." I signaled to Miguel, who was arranging bottles nearby, then led my children to the terrace where Pilar and I often sat in the evenings. "What are you doing here?" I asked once we were alone. "Dad told us where you were," Jackson said. "We've been trying to reach you for weeks." "I blocked your numbers for a while," I admitted. "After what you did." Cheyenne's eyes filled with tears. "Mom, we're so sorry. We were awful. Unforgivable." "Yes, you were." I looked at them, these adults I had raised, suddenly seeing them clearly, not as extensions of myself, but as separate people who had made a terrible choice. "Why did you do it?" They exchanged glances. Jackson spoke first. "We were frustrated. For years, ever since Dad left, you've been different. Sad all the time. Complaining about everything. Making us feel guilty for having any joy in our lives. The trip to Lisbon was supposed to be fun," Cheyenne added. "A chance for us all to reset. But from the moment we arrived, you found something wrong with everything. The hotel, the food, the weather, the tourists. So you decided to teach me a lesson by abandoning me in a foreign country," I said flatly. It was my idea, Jackson admitted. We were so angry after that last argument. I said you needed a wake-up call. I went along with it, Cheyenne said, tears streaming now. We thought you'd just call Dad or book another flight home right away. We didn't think you'd… What? Survive without you? Build a life here? I gestured around us. You didn't think I was capable of that. We didn't think at all, Cheyenne said quietly. We were just so tired of walking on eggshells around you. Her words stung, but I couldn't deny the truth in them. I had been difficult to be around. Still, what you did was cruel, I said, and illegal. You stole my passport. We know, Jackson said, looking genuinely ashamed. There's no excuse. How did you find me? I asked. Dad told us you were working at a winery in this region, but he didn't know which one, Cheyenne explained. We've been visiting every winery for the past 3 days. I almost laughed at the image of my city-dwelling children touring rural Spanish wineries searching for their missing mother. Did you think I'd just come home with you? I asked. They exchanged glances again. We hoped you would, Cheyenne admitted. The house feels empty without you. We miss you, Mom, Jackson added, and we're worried about you. I'm fine, I said. Better than fine, actually. So, you're just going to stay here? Work in a winery? Jackson asked, disbelief evident in his voice. For now, I said. I like it here. I'm learning, growing. For the first time since your father left, I feel like myself again. Cheyenne reached across the table for my hand. We're really sorry, Mom. What we did was wrong. I looked at their faces, Cheyenne's open and tearful, Jackson's more guarded but clearly remorseful. My children. Despite everything, I loved them. But I didn't need them anymore, not in the desperate, clinging way I had before. I forgive you, I said finally. But I'm not coming home yet. But, Jackson began. No, I cut him off. This is my decision. You two are adults with your own lives. Now I'm building mine. For how long? Cheyenne asked. I don't know. Pilar has asked me to stay through the harvest season. After that, we'll see. They looked bewildered, as if they couldn't reconcile this decisive woman with the mother they'd known. Where are you staying tonight? I asked. We have a hotel in town, Jackson said. Good. Have dinner with me tomorrow night. Pilar wants to meet you. You've told her about us? Cheyenne asked, looking worried. Everything, I confirmed. She's become a good friend. After agreeing on a time for dinner, they left, casting uncertain glances over their shoulders as they joined the tour group that was now sampling wines under Miguel's guidance. I watched them go, feeling strangely peaceful. The confrontation I'd been dreading was over, and I had remained strong, true to myself and my new path. Pilar found me still sitting there an hour later. Those were your children? She asked, sitting beside me. Yes. They've been touring every winery in the region looking for me. Persistent, Pilar observed. Like their mother. I smiled. I invited them for dinner tomorrow. I hope that's okay. Of course. She studied my face. How are you feeling? Lighter, I said. I forgave them, but I also stood my ground about staying. Pilar nodded approvingly. Good. Forgiveness doesn't mean going backward. That evening, I called Margaret at the embassy to thank her again for connecting me with Pilar. I wondered if I'd hear from you, she said. How's it going? Better than I could have imagined, I told her. I'm staying through the harvest season at least. I had a feeling about you, Margaret said. Something in your eyes when you said there was no rush to go home. My children found me today, I said. They came looking for me. And I'm still here. Margaret laughed. Good for you, Claire. You know, most people who come through my office with problems like yours just want the quickest way back to their comfort zone, even if that zone isn't very comfortable. I've had enough comfort to last a lifetime, I said. Now, I want growth. After we hung up, I sat on my small balcony overlooking the vineyards, where the grapes were swelling toward harvest. A text came through on my phone, from Cheyenne. Love you, Mom. Proud of you. The lump in my throat caught me by surprise. For so long I'd wanted their approval, their love, their attention. Now, having let go of that desperate need, it came freely. I texted back, love you too. See you tomorrow. Then I opened my laptop and began what I'd been putting off for weeks, updating my resume. Pilar had mentioned that a wine distributor in Madrid was looking for someone with language skills to liaise with international clients. It would be a real job, a new career at 52. Why not? I murmured to myself as I began typing. Why not me? I worked until late, crafting cover letters and researching the wine distribution business. When I finally went to bed, I fell into a deep, dreamless sleep, the sleep of someone at peace with their direction. I couldn't have known that the dinner with my children the next night would bring a revelation that would shake the foundations of this new life I was building and force me to make the most difficult choice yet. The dinner with my children started awkwardly. Cheyenne brought a bouquet of local wildflowers, and Jackson had selected a bottle of expensive Rioja, a peace offering that made Pilar smile diplomatically as she set it aside in favor of Quinta del Sol's own wines. Pilar had prepared a feast. Paella with locally sourced seafood, fresh bread, roasted vegetables from her garden. We sat on the terrace as the sun set over the vineyards, casting everything in a golden glow. Your mother has become indispensable here, Pilar told my children as she served the paella. She has a natural gift with the guests, and she's learning winemaking faster than most interns who come with degrees in viticulture. Cheyenne smiled at me. Mom always had a good palate. She could tell Dad's expensive wines from his everyday ones in blind tastings. A skill your father never appreciated, I added, surprised by the lack of bitterness in my voice. It was just a statement of fact now. The house is different without you, Jackson said suddenly. Empty. You both have your own lives, I reminded them. Your own apartments. But we still come home for Sunday dinners, Cheyenne said. It's not the same with you gone. I took a sip of wine. And yet, you chose to leave me behind. They had the grace to look ashamed. We've been talking about that, Jackson said. About why we did it. It wasn't just that you were complaining during the trip. Oh? I raised an eyebrow. Cheyenne set down her fork. It was years of feeling like we had to take care of you after Dad left. Like we had to fix you somehow. I never asked you to fix me, I said quietly. You didn't have to ask, Jackson responded. We could see you falling apart. The drinking, the crying, calling us multiple times a day to check where we were. You stopped seeing your friends, Cheyenne added. Stopped doing anything you used to enjoy. It was like you just gave up. Their words stung, but I couldn't deny the truth in them. I had given up. I had surrendered to grief and bitterness, letting it consume me. I'm sorry, I said. I didn't realize how much I was putting on you both. Pilar, who had been listening silently, spoke up. Children often end up parenting their parents in times of crisis. It reverses the natural order of things, creates resentment. Is that why you abandoned me? I asked. Resentment? Partly, Cheyenne admitted. But also because we were scared for you, Mom. You weren't getting better. You were getting worse. Jackson nodded. When you started complaining about everything in Lisbon, a trip we had planned for months to cheer you up, something just snapped. It felt like nothing would ever be enough, that you'd never be happy again. So you thought leaving me stranded would, what? Shock me out of depression? It sounds terrible when you put it like that, Cheyenne said, eyes downcast. It was terrible, I said firmly, but maybe also necessary. I looked at Pilar. Sometimes we need to be broken out of our patterns, even in painful ways. Pilar nodded, understanding in her eyes. She had broken out of her own destructive pattern, at great cost. There's something else you should know, Jackson said, his voice suddenly serious. About Dad. I tensed. What about him? Cheyenne and Jackson exchanged glances. It was Cheyenne who spoke. Amber left him 3 months ago. The news hit me strangely. I should have felt triumph, vindication. Instead, I felt a distant sadness for Robert. Why didn't he tell me when he came here? I asked. Pride, probably, Jackson said. But that's not all. The firm is struggling. He lost the Westfield contract. He's been drinking, missing meetings. He's falling apart, Mom, Cheyenne said. Like you did when he left. Only worse, because he doesn't have anyone. I understood now why they had really come. Not just to apologize, but to bring me back to fix their father. I'm sorry to hear that, I said carefully. But Robert's problems are not my responsibility anymore. But you could help him, Jackson insisted. He listens to you. He always has. No, I said firmly. I can't fix him, just like you couldn't fix me. He has to find his own way through this. They looked disappointed but not surprised. This new, boundary-setting mother was still unfamiliar to them. There's a wine distributor in Madrid looking for someone with my language skills, I told them, changing the subject. I'm applying for the position. You're really staying in Spain? Cheyenne asked, her voice small. For now, I like who I'm becoming here. I reached across the table to take her hand. It doesn't mean I don't love you both. It just means I'm choosing myself for once. The conversation shifted to lighter topics after that. Pilar told stories about the history of the region, and Cheyenne shared news about her graduate program. Jackson, always the practical one, asked about my financial situation, and I assured him I was managing well with my salary from the winery. After dinner, as Pilar cleared the dishes, refusing offers of help, Jackson excused himself to make a phone call. Cheyenne and I sat alone, watching the stars appear over the vineyard. I've never seen you like this, she said softly. Like what? Confident, peaceful. She studied my face. You seem younger somehow. I smiled. I feel younger. Less weighed down. We really are sorry, Mom. I know, and I've forgiven you. But I'm also grateful, in a strange way. If you hadn't left me in Lisbon, I would never have found this place. This version of myself. Cheyenne's eyes filled with tears. So you're not coming home? Ever? I don't know what ever looks like, I said honestly. But not now. Maybe I'll come visit for Christmas. Maybe you can come back here next summer. She nodded, wiping away a tear. I'd like that. When Jackson returned, his expression was troubled. I just talked to Dad. He's been trying to reach you. My phone's been off, I admitted. What's wrong? He sounded bad. He mentioned selling the house. Jackson ran a hand through his hair. I think he's in real financial trouble, Mom. I felt a familiar tug of responsibility, the pull to rush in and rescue. The old Claire would have been on the next flight home, ready to set aside her own needs to solve Robert's problems. But I wasn't that Claire anymore. He'll figure it out, I said. Or he won't. Either way, it's his journey now, not mine. Jackson looked shocked, but Cheyenne nodded slowly, understanding dawning in her eyes. The next morning, I drove them to the train station. The goodbye was emotional but not devastating. They promised to call regularly, and I promised to answer. We hugged for a long time before they boarded. Take care of each other, I told them. But don't feel responsible for fixing anyone else. Not me, not your father. We'll try, Cheyenne said. It's a hard habit to break. I know, I replied. Believe me, I know. I watched the train pull away, feeling a complex mixture of emotions. Love, sadness, relief, and most surprisingly, freedom. They would be okay without me hovering anxiously, and I would be more than okay on my own. When I returned to Quinta del Sol, Pilar was in the tasting room, preparing for the day's visitors. How are you feeling? She asked. Like I've closed one chapter and opened another, I said. She smiled. The distributor in Madrid called. They want to interview you next week. Really? Excitement bubbled up in me. Don't look so surprised. You're qualified, experienced, and you speak 3 languages. Why wouldn't they want you? Why wouldn't they, indeed? The question reverberated through me as I helped Pilar set up the tasting room. Why had I spent so long doubting my worth, defining myself solely by my relationships to others? That evening, I finally answered Robert's calls. He was indeed struggling, financially, emotionally, professionally. He hinted that he'd made a mistake leaving me, that perhaps we could try again. No, Robert, I said gently. That chapter is closed for both of us. But I do wish you well, and I hope you find your way through this difficult time. How did you do it? He asked, his voice hollow. How did you rebuild after I left? I thought about Pilar's story, about my own journey from abandoned in Lisbon to working in a Spanish winery and interviewing for a distribution company. I stopped looking backward, I told him. I stopped waiting for someone else to fix me. And I found people who saw value in me exactly as I am. After we hung up, I wrote a long email to my children. explaining more fully why I needed to stay in Spain, encouraging them to live their own lives without feeling responsible for either of their parents. I told them I loved them, was proud of them, and would always be there for them, but in a healthier way than before. 2 months later, I started my new job in Madrid. I found a small apartment near a park, close enough to visit Pilar at the winery on weekends. I joined a local expat group, made friends, started taking flamenco lessons. I video chatted with my children weekly, and we were planning their visit for the upcoming summer. One evening, as I sat on my tiny balcony watching the Madrid sunset, my phone buzzed with a text from Pilar. It was a photo of the tasting room at Quinta del Sol, where a framed picture now hung on the wall. Me in the vineyard during harvest, laughing as I held a cluster of grapes, the sun catching my hair. For the tourists who ask about the American woman who found herself in Spain, her message read, "Your story inspires them." It certainly inspired me. I smiled, remembering that first night at her table when she told me her story of escape and reinvention. I had never imagined then that I would find my own version of that journey. My children had abandoned me in Lisbon, thinking it was a cruel punishment. Instead, it had been the beginning of my liberation. They couldn't have known that in leaving me behind, they were actually setting me free. I typed back to Pilar, "Next weekend, let's open that special Tempranillo we saved from harvest. I have news to share." The news was that the distribution company was expanding, opening an office in New York. They had asked if I would consider running it. It would mean returning to the States, but not as the same woman who had left. It would mean bringing everything I had learned and become back to build something new. I hadn't decided yet what my answer would be. For the first time in my life, I had the luxury of choosing based not on what others needed from me, but on what I wanted for myself. Whatever I chose, I knew one thing for certain. I would never again be defined by someone else's expectations or limitations. The woman abandoned in Lisbon had disappeared forever. In her place stood someone stronger, wiser, and finally, gloriously free.